T9C got the fucking juice.
Silk is the new gold.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. On tonight's episode, we have to address some uncomfortable truths about Lamar Jackson, the hate that he receives from the NFL media, along with the uncomfortable truth about the Rams super team. Is this team going to be as good as what they look like on paper? Because they look no different from all the other super teams that you see come up short in the NBA. Kind of reminds me of when LeBron left Cleveland the first time and formed the Big Three with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh nearly 16 years ago with the Miami Heat. And that team came up short of expectations somewhat in their first year, losing in the finals to the Mavericks. And we might see the Rams disappoint the same way. Also want to reveal the 10 most important offseason moves that will decide how the Super Bowl race this upcoming season plays out. We're going to be discussing the state of the franchise for the Denver Broncos, the San Francisco 49ers. I want to respond to backlash that I'm getting from a bunch of Steelers fans about my latest NFL pre-training camp power rankings. And I'll be giving out my first-year expectations for Mike McCarthy replacing Mike Tomlin after 19 years being the Steelers head coach. If you live, eat, breathe, sleep, and die football, congratulations, you have arrived at the right place. We're talking all things football 24/7, 365 days throughout the year. Make sure that you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so you do not miss when we drop new content. And without further ado, man, let's dive into it. I want to discuss the 10 offseason moves that are going to decide how the Super Bowl picture, how the Super Bowl race this season plays out. Starting off at number 10, we got Dexter Lawrence, Sexy Dexy. He was traded from the Giants to Cincinnati in exchange for the 10th overall selection in this past year's draft. And if he bounces back, he is going to improve not just one of the weakest defenses in the NFL last year, but he'll improve a defense that couldn't stop the run, couldn't stop the pass, since he's one of the best run stoppers in the league, and he's one of the best pass rushing interior defensive linemen that you can find. It's very rare to find an interior defensive lineman that has the ability to impact the game the way Dexter Lawrence can. He's coming off a down year. I expect him to bounce back. He played last year injured, and he could have a bigger impact on the Bengals defense than what Trey Hendrickson had, since it's a lot harder to find defensive tackles that can do what Dexter Lawrence has the ability to do, that can affect the game the way that he can, since defensive tackles, there's just no way to game plan for them if they're one of those game wreckers like what Dexter Lawrence has the ability to be, since they're in the middle of the defense. There's only so much you can do. So he's the 10th most important offseason move that's going to determine how the Super Bowl race plays out, because if he's good, you're going to see a Bengals defense that should be good enough for this team to make a deep playoff run. Mike McDaniel comes in at number 9 for me. Although he's not a player, he's going to shape how the AFC race plays out, since he can elevate Justin Herbert to an MVP level. And we know Justin Herbert plays outstanding throughout the regular season. And strangely enough, he saves his worst football for the playoffs. Mike McDaniel, we know this dude knows offense. He got 2 really good seasons out of Tua, and the offense that he was using with Tua would not be the same offense he's going to use with Justin Herbert, since Herbert and Tua have 2 completely different skill sets, and that offense was built around Tua's strengths and his limitations. Justin Herbert doesn't really have a lot of limitations outside of play calling and bad offensive line play holding him back. Both of those things should be addressed with Mike McDaniel specializing in getting more out of the ground game. He comes from that Kyle Shanahan coaching tree, so you know that outside zone run game is going to be very dominant. The Chargers should have not just one of the best rushing attacks in the league, but overall, they should have one of the best offenses in the league, and you should see Justin Herbert right smack dab in the Super Bowl conversation, along with him playing MVP level football, because that's the kind of impact that this hire is going to have on the Chargers this year. And this is one of those, you got to take advantage of it while it lasts, because I'm pretty confident Mike McDaniel, with how good of a job he's going to do calling plays, he won't be around in LA for longer than a year. I got DJ Moore at number 8. DJ Moore right now is 28 years old, and he's probably one of the most underrated wide receivers in the NFL over the last 5-6 years. His first year in Chicago, he had 1,300 receiving yards with Justin Fields as his quarterback. His production has only dropped because the Bears had a lot of weapons last season, and there were a lot of mouths to feed. The Bills have no choice but to feed DJ Moore, since they traded for him to be that true number one wide receiver that they were lacking. And I expect him to end up having the kind of career explosion that we saw Stephon Diggs have. Before Stephon Diggs got traded to the Bills, you knew he was a good receiver with the Minnesota Vikings. Once he got to Buffalo, he became a top 5 wide receiver for a 3-4 year stretch. You could see DJ Moore have a similar career explosion, despite this being what most would consider the second half of his career. And he's quietly had a somewhat borderline Hall of Fame level career. So if he puts together 3-4 high level seasons with Josh Allen, then he could find himself right smack dab by the time he retires, a guy who ends up getting into the Hall of Fame because he had a late career resurgence, thanks to him playing with the best quarterback he's ever played with in Josh Allen. On top of that, he already knows Joe Brady's system since he was his offensive coordinator for a few years back with the Panthers. At number 7, I got Trent McDuffie. Trent McDuffie, all-pro level corner, one of the best corners in the game. He fixes not only what was a huge weakness for the Rams, but a weakness that kept them from winning the NFC Championship. With Trent McDuffie now, along with the trade that they recently made for Myles Garrett, it makes him even more effective, since he's going to be able to take away quarterbacks' number one receivers, and quarterbacks aren't going to have that much time to figure who their second option is going to be. They're going to hold on to the ball longer than what they should. And that's why getting Trent McDuffie is the 7th most impactful move in terms of how the Super Bowl race is going to shape up. Since when you have a lockdown corner like him that can erase your number one receiver, and you got one of the greatest defensive players ever in Myles Garrett humming off the edge, quarterbacks really aren't going to have that much time to go through their progressions, make good decisions. A lot of decisions are going to be rushed, and that's when I think that the Rams defense ends up playing their best football, when they can get you behind the chains, they can get you in the second and third and long situations. And Trent McDuffie and Myles Garrett are going to be a huge part of what the Rams expect to do this season coming up. Trey Hendrickson, before last season, he was coming off multiple 14.5 sack seasons for Cincinnati. He quietly has been one of the better pass rushers of this generation. And last year, the Ravens' pass rush was nowhere to be found. It was MIA. Jesse Minter taking over as the head coach, looking to rejuvenate that defense. Trey Hendrickson is going to be a huge part in that rejuvenation. And listen, if Trey Hendrickson stays healthy, he should be the game record that the Ravens need on a defense that can get guys like Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, maybe Patrick Mahomes off the field when they get to the playoffs this year. At number 5, I have Jaylen Waddle. Jaylen Waddle was one of the biggest domino moves in the NFL. There were a good amount of teams that were in need of a guy like Jaylen Waddle that can generate explosives, rather it be in a vertical passing game, after the catch. He's the perfect fit for what the Broncos offense was lacking last season, which was the ability to get those explosives more consistently. And with Davis Webb taking over for Sean Payton with the offensive play calling, you're going to see Jaylen Waddle be a huge part of what the Broncos want to do underneath. If you're looking for a guy who can take a jet sweep, a bubble screen, a 5-yard slant to the house for 6, Jaylen Waddle is your guy. The Broncos didn't really have a lot of receivers that were good at making guys miss after the catch, and it didn't really have a lot of guys that were great at stretching the field necessarily. Jaylen Waddle fixes both of those issues, and I also think Jaylen Waddle is going to help Bo Nix possibly go from being a very good quarterback to finally cementing himself as an elite quarterback. At number 4, I have Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker, although he isn't revered as one of the best running backs in the league, I think he was one of the most impactful pickups made during this offseason, since Kansas City, what they've lacked on offense is an identity. Outside of Patrick Mahomes, you don't really have anybody else that you can hang your hat on. Kenneth Walker now is that guy that they can lean on late in the games to hold on the leads, to take some of that pressure off of Patrick Mahomes, to where you're not relying on the Patrick Mahomes magic to win as much as what you were in the earlier phases of the Chiefs dynasty. And I also think that Kenneth Walker is going to get a little bit of some help. He won't be the full workhorse back, since they drafted Emmett Johnson in the mid rounds of the draft out of Nebraska. So I think he'll be able to spell him. And as long as Kenneth Walker stays healthy, I think that he will end up becoming a premier back with Kansas City. He had to split a lot of carries with Zach Charbonnet in Seattle. Won't really be splitting as many carries with Emmett Johnson and KC, especially with Eric Bieniemy being the offensive play caller again, returning back to KC. You're going to see the run game not only be important for Kansas City being able to win games late, but Kenneth Walker probably is going to be the new identity that the Chiefs build their new offensive system around this season coming up. I got defensive coordinator Jim Leonhard as the third most impactful offseason move that will decide the Super Bowl race. Everybody's talking about the promotion of Joe Brady from offensive coordinator to head coach, replacing Sean McDermott, but he's not what's going to be the difference in the Bills getting over the hump. What the difference is going to be is Jim Leonhard taking over the defense that has costed Buffalo possibly winning the Super Bowl, possibly winning the AFC over the last 7-8 years. Jim Leonhard, despite not having any experience calling defenses at the NFL level, the last time he was a defensive coordinator at the college ranks, it was for Wisconsin. And for the 6 years that he was Wisconsin's defensive coordinator, 5 of those years, he fielded top 5 defenses. So Jim Leonhard is a well-respected football mind. I think that he's going to quickly become a head coach. And if he's as good as what I expect him to be, then you're going to see a Bills team that finally should be able to win the AFC, get over the hump, and finally get Josh Allen a Super Bowl win. And Jim Leonhard, his defense is going to be a huge part of that. Sean McDermott's defenses were good in the regular season. In the playoffs, they were allowing nearly 30 points per contest. I don't expect for the defense to surrender that amount of points, cost you as many games with Jim Leonhard taking over as the defensive coordinator and the primary caller than what Sean McDermott allowed. At number 2, I have Jesse Minter. Jesse Minter is walking into the best situation of any first-year head coach, since he is inheriting a team that is already built to win. Most new head coaches, when they first get a new head coaching job or it's their second opportunity to become a head coach, they don't inherit good quarterback situations. Jesse Minter is getting one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history in Lamar Jackson. How do you get him to play better in the postseason? Well, you ask him to do less and you play better team football, which is what the Ravens haven't done that well in the last few postseason appearances that they had under John Harbaugh. They struggled taking care of the football. They just had too many self-inflicted errors, stupid penalties. They just weren't locked in crucial moments when they needed to be. Jesse Mentor being a defensive-minded coach, being a little bit more modern, he's probably going to have a more conservative approach, probably isn't going to put as much pressure on his offense as what John Harbaugh did. And he's also probably going to put more emphasis on making sure that the Ravens establish the ground game in the postseason. You don't got to worry about the Ravens only running the ball 9 times if they potentially make it to the AFC Championship this year like they did a few years ago when they lost to Kansas City. And that defense, when you think of what the Ravens are at their best, it's being an elite defensive team. Defense is normally the catalyst for the Ravens being one of the best teams in the league. And that's going to be the case this year with Jesse Mentor. He coached 2 top 10 defenses with the Chargers, with personnel that wasn't really top 10 level, and he was able to elevate it despite having a good amount of young players that he had to deal with. So with him inheriting a defense that already has the talent, guys like Roquan Smith, Madubuike, Kyle Hamilton, you signed Trey Hendrickson in free agency. If this Ravens defense ends up being as good as what it should be with Jesse Mentor taking over, then the Ravens are going to be a problem. And I think that the AFC runs through them this year, since you essentially should have a top 10 offense and at the bare minimum, a top 10 defense. And most teams don't have that level of production on both sides of the ball, which would make the Ravens the favorites to win the AFC to me. And then at number 1, we have Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett made the Rams, or took the Rams from being an already great team to being a super team. This is the closest thing that the NFL will ever get to the real life Avengers. And you possibly could get Aaron Donald out of retirement as well. So you got Trent McDuffie, Jaylen Watson to beef up your secondary. Now you get even better than what you were last year, being able to get after the quarterback, because Jared Verse was really good. So you go from Jared Verse, a Pro Bowl caliber edge, to now getting one of the greatest defensive players to ever play, and you're pairing him up with a fellow MVP. This Myles Garrett move makes it now where the NFC, or pretty much you could say this entire NFL season, revolves around the Rams. Because if the Rams are able to stay healthy and they don't have to deal with any major injuries, then there's really nothing that can really stop them from winning it all, since this would be a personnel mismatch for a handful of teams in the NFC. Anybody they could possibly match up against in the Super Bowl outside of maybe the Denver Broncos and the Baltimore Ravens. Those are the only teams that, from a talent standpoint, can really match up with the LA Rams. So these are the 10 offseason moves that I believe are going to decide how the Super Bowl race plays out this upcoming NFL season. If you haven't already, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so you don't miss when we drop new content. We're talking NFL, college football, all things football, 24/7, 365 days throughout the year. If you live, eat, breathe, sleep, and die football, make sure that you go ahead and you have post notifications turned on and that you are subscribed so you do not miss when we drop new content. Follow us at JT_Sports is where you can find us on all social media platforms, Instagram, X, TikTok, Facebook. If you have any questions, any topics that you would like us to discuss on a future episode, you can add us, send them in the DMs, wherever you're on, Instagram, X, TikTok. Go ahead, follow us at JT_Sports. Let's continue on. The Rams feel like when LeBron James left Cleveland to form the Big Three with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh down in Miami 16 years ago. And you got stars everywhere. It kind of feels like the real life version of the Avengers in the NFL. You got the reigning MVP in Matthew Stafford at quarterback. You got the reigning Defensive Player of the Year who just broke the single season sack record in Myles Garrett. You got Puka. You got Devontae Adams. You got Trent McDuffie. You got Kyron Williams. You have one of the best offensive minds in NFL history, and Sean McVay. It doesn't get no closer to the Avengers than what you currently see with the Rams roster coming into this season. But the uncomfortable truth about the Rams Super Bowl team is, in spite of how invincible they look right now on Irelands.com, the NFL doesn't hand out Super Bowls by how good you look on paper. The games are played on the field for a reason. And if there's one weakness that the Rams have that can completely derail their Super Bowl or bust expectations, it's the game of attrition. What do I mean by attrition? We all know throughout a 17-game regular season, every team goes through their fair share of injuries. So are you going to have the depth in order to overcome injuries to some of your core guys that you're relying on if you're the Los Angeles Rams? Because the thing about putting together a team this good is that, yes, the top end is better than anybody else's top end in the NFL. Nobody's going to have a better impact core of guys than what the LA Rams are going to have walking into this season. But when you have so much money, so much invested into these players, you're not really going to have a lot of quality backups that can give you serviceable play in replace of these guys. Let's say Myles Garrett has to miss a few games, and maybe Trent McDuffie or Matthew Stafford miss some games. More times than not, you're not going to have a backup that can even give you 25% of the production that those guys can give you. Now, sure, you're solid at other places. You know, you're not really lacking at any position, but once injuries start to become a problem, that's when the Rams can start losing the attrition battle, and the rest of the NFC can open up for everybody else, mainly the foes within your division. Because the NFC essentially comes down to the NFC West. The NFC West is going to decide who ends up representing the NFC in the Super Bowl this year. We know the Rams are the favorite to win it all, but with a few injuries, you open the door for the Seahawks to possibly repeat, or maybe the 49ers to end up shocking everybody and making it to the Super Bowl. I think that the 49ers have the best shot out of any team in the NFC to possibly stop the Rams from winning the NFC Championship, because the talent gap between the 49ers and the Rams really isn't that big. The 49ers, the edge they have over the Rams is they have a lot more depth than what they do. While the Rams were stockpiling talent, assembling the Avengers this offseason, the 49ers were a little bit more low-key. Sure, they got guys like Mike Evans and Oza Odighizuwa, but they got a lot of good depth pieces. They got Romello Height, a very good edge rusher early during the draft who could be a good replacement if Nick Bosa gets injured again or if Michael Williams gets injured. You signed a very good cornerback and Jack Jones who could be a really good replacement if somebody goes down with an injury. You're loaded at linebacker. You're loaded pretty much everywhere at every position on both offense and defense. If a guy comes down with an injury, you have enough on the bench to be able to overcome that. And if the 49ers were fully healthy last season, maybe that game against the Seattle Seahawks in the second round has a different outcome than what it did. The Rams don't have the same cushion as what other teams do in the NFC as far as being able to survive attrition. And that's just as big as being a talented team is. You're only as good as the guys that you have on the bench, because guys aren't going to be able to fully stay healthy for the Rams. You're going to have a few guys that get nicked up, and if you don't have guys who can come off the bench and be able to fill in and at least be somewhat serviceable, that's going to hold this team back from living up to the high expectations they currently have at the moment. And the NFC West, even if the Rams are able to stay fully healthy, the Rams are going to have to see either the Seahawks or the 49ers to win the NFC and to make it to the Super Bowl. Sure, you may be more talented than those teams, but those teams are going to have their third shot at being able to play you. And the coaching is too good for Kyle Shanahan and Mike McDaniel to not find some kind of weakness that can be exploited either with your offense or your defense, in spite of how talented you are. Because it's not always about how talented of a team you have. Sometimes it comes down to how good is the coaching. And the gap in talent between the Rams and the Seahawks, the 49ers, is not really that wide. Sure, they're a better team, but they're not going to have this huge advantage like what you would in college football when you have the best team in the SEC going up against the worst team in the ACC or the second best team in the ACC. You know, the talent advantage that the Rams have probably gives them a 2, maybe 3-point edge over the Seahawks and the 49ers in any possible postseason game that they could play in. So what makes up that 3-point differential? Why we could possibly see an upset from either the Seahawks or the 49ers if they play the Rams in the playoffs? The coaching. Kyle Shanahan has been here before. He's been to 2 Super Bowls. Even though he hasn't won one, he knows how to get there. He knows how to win big games. Same thing with the Seattle Seahawks, especially with Mike McDaniel being a defensive-minded coach. So the gap in talent, in spite of adding Myles Garrett and Trent McDuffie, is still not big enough to where you can just simply pencil in and right now on paper that the Rams, if they had to play the Seahawks or the 49ers in the playoffs, would be a lock to beat them. Because I don't think that the gap in talent is that big to where it's a guarantee they would beat one of those 2 teams if they have to see them for a third time in the postseason. And familiarity also works against the Rams. When you have a team this good, the more times you play them, the more you can get a better understanding of where their strengths are and where the few weaknesses may be that you could take advantage of to possibly upset this team and stop them from winning the Super Bowl. I'm not saying the Rams won't win it, but there is a higher probability that they don't go all the way. Because a lot of super teams in the NFL normally haven't gone on to win it all. Normally, the best teams end up losing to teams that they have no business losing to because they end up losing to teams that aren't as talented as them, but they were able to rise to the occasion because of the coaching and the talent differential not really being that wide as what people think looking at this roster in the offseason at this moment. So apparently, I have been glazing the Bengals because in my latest power rankings that I just dropped a few days ago, I had the Cincinnati Bengals as my 12th best team coming into this season over the Pittsburgh Steelers, who I have at 18. And a lot of Steelers fans were very upset with me. Some of them not only left very angry comments, but they unsubscribed, they unfollowed me because they believe that the Pittsburgh Steelers have a better overall team than what the Bengals do, which you're not wrong. I actually agree with that. I believe that the Steelers have a more complete team than what Cincinnati has walking into this season. They don't have as many question marks on defense as what the Bengals do. They have a better offensive line than what the Bengals have. But even though the Steelers are a more complete team than what the Bengals are, I have more faith in how far the Bengals can go than what the Steelers can go this season. And these power rankings weren't solely based on me ranking every team from worst to best based on who was the most talented. That somewhat was a factor, but I also took into consideration how far these teams possibly could go in January. And the Cincinnati Bengals are built for more success in the postseason this year than what the Steelers are. The Steelers haven't won a playoff game in over a decade. And yes, this team has a complete roster, but they don't really have as many high-level players as what the Bengals do. And the Bengals' strength is their offense. They have an actual identity. The Steelers don't really have identity. They don't really have a overwhelming strength, an overwhelming side of the ball, an overwhelming position that separates them from everybody else in the AFC, like how the Bengals do on offense with the trio of Burrow, Higgins, and Jamar. We just need a defense that can just get stops when it matters, that can at least be average. And we just got to be able to outscore everybody. And the Bengals have won with this formula before. The Bengals have already made it to the Super Bowl, won the AFC with a great offense and an average to slightly above average defense. So we've already seen the Cincinnati Bengals cook up in the kitchen with these same ingredients that they have coming into this season. Meanwhile, we've seen the Steelers underachieve for over a decade. And plus, this is going to be their first time in nearly 2 decades that they won't have Mike Tomlin on the sideline. Now, some Steelers fans will say that losing Mike Tomlin is kind of the best thing that can happen because he was holding the Steelers back since he didn't know how to get quarterback right and he didn't know how to fix the offense. It also could be a net positive losing Mike Tomlin because what a lot of Steelers fans aren't considering is what if the Steelers' playoff shortcomings wasn't all on Mike Tomlin? What if it more so was due to the organization than what it was Mike Tomlin? What if it more so is just an organization problem than it was a Mike Tomlin problem? What if Mike Tomlin was masking a lot of problems with the Steelers that were getting overlooked because he was being scapegoated due to not being able to get the offense right? So I don't think that even with Mike McCarthy, the Steelers' ceiling really improves that much compared to the Bengals ceiling. The Bengals could win the AFC and be in the Super Bowl. If everything goes right for the Steelers this year, how successful of a season do they have? Probably win a playoff game and are competitive in the divisional round. And that would be a solid ending. But I just don't have the same amount of confidence in the Steelers being able to go as far as what the Bengals do if everything goes right. And the Steelers, to me, right now, are anywhere between a 7 to 11 win team this season. The Bengals, with how easy their schedule is, at the bare minimum, worst case scenario, this is a 9-8 team. Best case, they could have the number 1 seed in the AFC going into the postseason. That's how good this team has the ability to be. Because while they may not be as complete as Pittsburgh, they have an identity that they've won with in the postseason before. And they just have more matchup problems that they can create with all the issues that you have trying to slow down this offense as compared to the Steelers, who they can have a good defense and above average offense, but they are capped at a certain ceiling. So I got the Bengals at number 12, more so because I have more faith that the way their team is constructed will lead them to have a more successful season than what I believe the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to have this season coming up. The same reason people still argue about why the Seahawks didn't give Marshawn Lynch the ball at the 1-yard line in the Super Bowl against the Patriots, it's the same reason why the NFL media constantly hates on Lamar Jackson. They hate on Lamar Jackson because they hate the fact that somebody that has his image is one of the faces of the league. Coming from where he comes from, Southern Florida, out of the trenches, out of the mud. They don't like the fact that Lamar Jackson has these $30,000 VVS grills in his mouth. They don't like how he talks. They don't like how he looks. And they also don't like the fact that Lamar Jackson has proved all the media talking heads wrong about how good of a player he was going to be when he was coming out of Louisville years ago in the 2018 NFL draft. And it bothers a lot of members of the media how wrong Lamar Jackson has made them look about him more than they would like to admit, which is why Lamar Jackson gets more hate than any other quarterback in NFL history, despite being a 2-time MVP and a 3-time first-team All-Pro. Only one of 8 quarterbacks to have these accolades, being a 3-time first-team All-Pro selection, a multiple-time MVP winning quarterback. He gets judged on a different scale than guys like Josh Allen and Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert has yet to win a playoff game. He saves his worst football for the most important time of the regular season. You train all offseason to get to the playoffs. For 1 month, all you have to do is play 3-4 good games consecutively, and you'll hoist in the Lombardi Trophy. And yet, somehow, some way, Colin Cowherd thinks Justin Herbert is a better quarterback than what Lamar Jackson is, despite how much he has choked in the postseason. Josh Allen, we're not going to talk about how he just got his head coach fired with how he played in the playoffs and the Bills' divisional round loss to the Denver Broncos, but yet those guys don't get the amount of scrutiny. They don't get criticized as much as what Lamar Jackson does, because Lamar Jackson is judged by a different standard. You see, when Josh Allen and Justin Herbert play bad in the playoffs and they lose, it's just another bad playoff game. But when Lamar Jackson loses in the playoffs, it's one of the few opportunities that all the Lamar Jackson haters that have been wrong about him since he came out of college have to feel somewhat vindicated about their stance on Lamar Jackson. And that is, he can't win when it matters because he doesn't throw the football as well as what he needs to in the postseason for the Ravens to go the distance. And you have a lot of people now that are changing the narrative around Lamar Jackson to now trying to use his age as an indictment on why he no longer is the player that he once used to be when he won back-to-back MVPs and should have won his third MVP, because he's slowing down. He's not as fast as what he used to look in seasons before last. And they leave out how Lamar Jackson played all of 2025 banged up. He never was at 100%. Even when he had to sit out for a few games, even when he came back, you still could obviously tell that Lamar Jackson wasn't himself. But the thing with Lamar Jackson, though, is people are still clinging on to the same perception that they had about him coming out of college, that he was just another super athletic quarterback that was more athlete than he was quarterback, and that he was never going to be polished enough as a passer to have success at the NFL level. They're still hanging on to that narrative. They're still clinging on to this narrative that Lamar Jackson can't throw the ball, because you got all these media heads now talking about how Lamar Jackson has regressed. He isn't the same athlete that he used to be. Even if Lamar has regressed, Lamar can play another decade in the NFL and still be a top 5 quarterback, because he's one of the best throwers of the football that the NFL has ever seen. Do you know who has the NFL's highest career passer rating? It's Lamar Jackson. Do you know who is up there with the likes of Peyton Manning and Tom Brady for most games with a perfect passer rating? Lamar Jackson. The media still can't get over the fact that they were wrong about Lamar Jackson, so they have to use his lack of postseason success against them, because it's the only way they can actually feel vindicated about Lamar Jackson from being wrong about him nearly a decade ago. And people don't like the fact that Lamar Jackson has been a trailblazer for the quarterback position. Lamar Jackson has changed what a quarterback is supposed to look like in the modern NFL. When you're looking for the modern quarterback, you're not looking for Tom Brady or Peyton Manning. You're not looking for Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. You're looking for the next Lamar Jackson, because when Lamar Jackson is on and he's playing his best football, he's the most unstoppable quarterback that God ever created. Playing Lamar Jackson is the equivalent to playing a 99 overall quarterback with maxed out stats in real life. He can throw the ball. He can run the football like Barry Sanders. There's not a single thing that Lamar Jackson can't do. And that's the part that the media doesn't like. Lamar Jackson doesn't just prove you wrong. He also has become one of the greatest to ever do it with his own playing style, being able to do it his own way. And people don't like that. People still hate the fact that Lamar Jackson plays the quarterback position untraditionally. They think that he's supposed to be this traditional 1-2-3 drop back passer like how Justin Herbert is. And that's not his game, even though it can be his game, but he's just able to destroy you so many different ways, whether it be inside the pocket, outside the pocket. And that's what makes Lamar Jackson such a headache to game plan for. There really is no way to stop this dude. When you play Lamar Jackson, you essentially have to change your entire defensive scheme, because if you don't have the personnel to keep this man in the pocket, to keep this man from running all over you, you're not going to have a shot at being able to slow him down. And people in the media hate on Lamar Jackson because they don't like the way that he looks. Just like how they didn't want Marshawn Lynch to get the ball at the 1 yard line, because if he would have gotten it, he would have scored and he would have won Super Bowl MVP. The same reason the Seahawks didn't want Marshawn Lynch to win Super Bowl MVP, which is why they refused to run the ball at the 1. It's the same reason why people in the national media always hate on Lamar. They hate on Lamar Jackson because they hate the image that he has. He is a RN from the trenches, and they don't like that representing the league, which is why they criticize Lamar Jackson more than they do Justin Herbert and Josh Allen. Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, they get all the excuses in the world when they struggle in the playoffs, but Lamar Jackson doesn't, because look how they look and look how Lamar Jackson looks. Lamar Jackson was never supposed to be the player that he is right now. He is the equivalent to taking your best athlete on your high school team, putting him at quarterback, but actually teaching him the position. And when you teach somebody that has the physical gifts that Lamar Jackson has, how to really play quarterback the right way, they end up being a monster to stop, and they end up being held to this different standard because people tie what they were supposed to be into what they are now and still use it as an indictment against them. So anytime Lamar has some struggles in the postseason, that's when you start seeing all the Lamar Jackson's overrated. Lamar Jackson isn't a championship winning quarterback, because it's the only time they can feel vindicated with how wrong they've been about Lamar Jackson. And that's the uncomfortable truth about why the NFL media hates Lamar Jackson. If you haven't already, make sure that you go ahead and you check us out on all podcasting platforms. You can find this episode along with all of our previous ones on Apple, Spotify. The links are down in the description down below. If you don't want a starting quarterback for your favorite team to play like Anthony Richardson, do yourself, your favorite team, and yours truly a favor. Go ahead, give us a 5-star review. The links are down in the description down below. Shout out to everybody that's tapped in. Shout out to my guy, Double Tap. He says, nah, bro, you right about Herbert, not Josh, though. Some truth there. Lamar Jackson gets simpler defenses because of how dynamic he is. Yeah, man, I agree with you, man. Absolutely agree. Let's continue on. We got to stay at the franchise. Stay at the franchise for the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos are in a fascinating situation because last season, they arrived at the door. This season, you got to kick the door down because you no longer are a sleeper team, a fringe Super Bowl contender. You're a legit Super Bowl contender. And believe it or not, the Broncos are one of the few teams that match up very well with the LA Rams in a possible Super Bowl matchup. They have one of the most talented rosters in the NFL. They got an elite defense that was overshadowed. They were third in points per game behind the Texans and the Seahawks, and their defense wasn't talked about in the same regard as those defenses, even though they were in the same category. The guys were raising hell against every quarterback they were lining up against. They had the best pass rush in the NFL last season, and they still have the best pass rush in the NFL coming into the 2026 season. But offensively, though, that's where you're going to see the most growth out of the Denver Broncos this year, and why the Broncos are no longer a dark horse Super Bowl contender. Because now the Broncos are actually in the mix to be able to win the AFC this year, since they traded for Jaylen Waddle. And Jaylen Waddle, what he brings to the Broncos was everything that this offense was lacking last year. The ability to generate explosives in the passing game. And we're not just talking about being able to spam a bunch of 40, 50-yard deep bombs. We're talking about guys that can just make something happen after the catch with the ball in their hands. Somebody that can take a bubble screen or a 5-yard slant and turn it into a 50, 60-yard gain. The Broncos just didn't really have a lot of dynamic playmakers on offense last year. Jaylen Waddle, outside of Bo Nix, is the best player on this Broncos offense. What he brings is somebody that not only can be an elite deep threat for you, but also can be an elite yak threat with what he can do after the catch. Not only is he one of the fastest players in the league, but he's one of the toughest players to bring down in the open field, because he's not just speed. This guy's also very strong, has very good balance. When Jaylen Waddle gets the ball in the open field after the catch, he essentially turns into a de facto running back. And the Broncos, with Sean Payton giving up play calling to their young offensive coordinator, you're going to need to find guys who can just generate easy offense. And that's what Jaylen Waddle is going to do. Jaylen Waddle is also going to elevate Bo Nix, because last year, Bo Nix, he didn't really have a true number one receiver that he could go to in the bind, and he could find a guy that can just make a big play. Now, sure, you got Courtland Sutton. He's a good wide receiver, but I think he more so is a high-end wide receiver 2 than he is a high-end wide receiver 1. And Jaylen Waddle, he's going to open things up a lot more for the rest of these Broncos receivers. Courtland Sutton, Pat Bryant, possibly Evan Ingram at tight end this year. So he opens up a lot more for the offense, which is what is also going to help Bo Nix elevate his level of play. Because now Bo Nix is going to have more options to throw the football to, because now you got a number one guy that defenses are going to have to key in on, and they're going to have to build their game plans around, which is going to open up opportunities for everybody else to eat. And the Broncos last year, they just were leaving too many leftovers in the refrigerator on offense last year. Last year, the offense was good, but it still felt like they left some leftovers in the refrigerator that they forgot about and let them go bad and had to throw them out 2 weeks later. The Broncos, with Davis Webb taking over for Sean Payton with the offensive play calling, I feel this offense has a chance to open up a lot more than what it did with Sean Payton, because Sean Payton was a good play caller. He wasn't trash, but there were moments when the offense was just too predictable. You knew that in 3rd and 5, a bubble screen was coming, a 5-yard slant was coming, just something short underneath. You knew was going to be the play call from Sean Payton. And that's why he decided, for the first time in his career, to give up play calling and allow Davis Webb to do it. And by adding Jaylen Waddle, you really are going to give Bo Nix an element that can just completely take his game from being flirting between being an elite and good quarterback to now being a consistently elite quarterback. And Bo Nix, it's the difference between the Denver Broncos being a good team and being a team that can actually compete for the Super Bowl this year. Because Bo Nix has already proved that he's a good quarterback. But we still question if he can consistently maintain a level of play that can make him an elite quarterback. If you get an elite quarterback play or an elite season out of Bo Nix this year, he could win MVP. And if he gives you that level of play, you can compete with anybody, not just within the AFC, but even if you got to play the super team that is the LA Rams in the Super Bowl this year, you can beat them if Bo Nix is giving you MVP level quarterback play. So if Bo Nix becomes more consistent being an elite quarterback, being able to maintain an elite level of play for the entirety of the year instead of 1 week playing elite, another week looking okay, another week looking great. If he can just be an elite quarterback from week 1 to the final week of the season, I think that's good enough for the Broncos to be able to get over the hump. The only challenge that the Broncos really have is now you got expectations. Last year, nobody was really expecting much out of you but to make it to the playoffs. This year, people expect you to not just get back to the AFC Championship, but they expect you to have a legit shot at being able to actually win that thing, because if Bo Nix would have never gotten injured last year, you probably would have ended up being AFC champions. Now, even though the Broncos have Bo Nix back fully healthy, they added Jaylen Waddle, they're a more talented team than what they were last season, the division has also gotten better. And what can slow down the Broncos this season is them falling victim to the cannibalization of the AFC West. The AFC West is the second toughest division in the NFL this year, only behind the NFC West, which is a little bit ironic. But you could see a lot of cannibalization in the AFC West this year, and it could hurt how good the Broncos could be because they end up splitting with the Chiefs, or they split with the Chargers, or they end up having the upset loss to the Raiders, who are more than capable of being able to steal a game away from you. And that's what could keep them from reaching their ceiling, because they could be good enough to have the 1 seed in the AFC again. They also, with how difficult their division is, could risk being a 5th or possible 6th seed, and the road through the AFC doesn't run through Mile High this year. It ends up you having to go on the road to play Kansas City and Arrowhead, or you got to play Buffalo and Buffalo, or you got to go on the road to play the New England Patriots. So for the Denver Broncos, can you overcome possible cannibalization in the AFC West, and can you handle actually having legit Super Bowl expectations this year? But right now, the Broncos, they're at the door. They're knocking on it. Nobody wants to let them in. This season, they got to prove that they can kick that thing down, make it out of the AFC. And if they do, they have just as good as a shot as the Baltimore Ravens do to beat the Rams and win the Super Bowl. If you are somebody that enjoys talking football 24/7, you just can't help yourself but to talk about football, join our Discord server. We want to hear from you. We want to talk ball with you. The link is down in the description below. Let's move on. The 49ers are in a strange state right now. They still have a Super Bowl caliber roster, but they feel like an afterthought in the NFC. It seems like there's only 2 teams being talked about in the NFC, and that's the reigning Super Bowl champions, the Seattle Seahawks, and the LA Rams, who right now currently have the spotlight because they have assembled the Avengers. And for the 49ers, you kind of feel like an old heavyweight boxer that is just beginning to exit out of their prime. You're not washed up, but you're not as big as a threat as what you were a few years ago when you still had prime Debo, prime Nick Bosa, prime George Kittle. Now those guys are a lot older. You no longer have Debo Samuel, along with a good amount of that core group from those 2 Super Bowl teams that lost to Patrick Mahomes. This year, you are relying more than ever on a lot of veteran players for you being able to stay healthy. And last season, what nobody really brings up is how differently last season could have ended if the 49ers had Nick Bosa and Fred Warner on the field for that divisional round game that they lost to the Seattle Seahawks. What isn't being talked about enough is, despite the 49ers being a heavyweight boxer that is now starting to exit out of their prime, they still have a lethal left hook. And if they're decisive with how they use it, they can land a few knockout blows and end up winning the Super Bowl when everybody thought their Super Bowl window was completely closed. The 49ers aren't dead as far as Super Bowl contenders go. They just no longer are the favorites because we've moved on to somebody else. We moved on to championing the Rams before they actually earned the title champion because of how good their roster looks in the offseason. The Seahawks are the defending Super Bowl champs. And for the 49ers, you kind of just feel like you're the third wheel. You're the afterthought that nobody's really taking seriously because the moves that you made this offseason weren't as headline worthy as the moves that the Rams made this offseason. While the Rams were assembling the Avengers, the 49ers were making moves that nobody talks about until late during the season when you start seeing all of the good depth pieces that the 49ers have that they assembled during this offseason, like trading for Aza Digizua, drafting Romello Hyde, signing a guy like a Jack Jones, bringing in Mike Evans. So while a lot of their offseason moves weren't really that flashy, they were moves that provided good depth. And, guys that despite the age, if they can get to the playoffs, if they're healthy enough by that point, they make the 49ers as good as anybody to win the NFC. And the gap between the Rams and the 49ers is not as wide as what people think. It's not like the Rams are Alabama and the 49ers are FAMU. The differential and probably the point discrepancy is probably only a 3-4 point swing. And what makes up for that is the coaching. And Kyle Shanahan is an elite coach. This guy has been to the Super Bowl twice, hasn't won one yet, but he knows what it takes to at least get there. And to get there, you probably are going to have to go through a team within your division to do so. And by the time the 49ers play the Rams the second time, possibly the third time in the postseason, maybe the attrition starts to set in for the Rams. Maybe by that point, the Rams are banged up with a few injuries, and they're in the same situation late in the season as what you were. A lot of their best players aren't on the field, and that's when you have a legit path to win the Super Bowl, because the 49ers, with the moves they made this offseason, they made them to be able to overcome injuries, be able to survive the war of attrition that the NFL becomes once you get to the middle to late portions of the season, early November, late December. And I think that's why John Lynch, had the offseason mentality that he had. He said, we're not going to chase stars because our problem isn't lack of high-end talent. It's the lack of depth and being able to overcome when we lose some of our high-end guys to injury. So with all the depth that the 49ers have, they have a legit path to win the Super Bowl this year. It kind of requires the Rams having a little bit of misfortune to capitalize off it. But the 49ers Super Bowl path this year is them being able to win the war of attrition over the Rams and them having a lot of familiarity. Even if the Rams are fully healthy and the 49ers have to play them in the playoffs at full strength with Trent McDuffie, Myles Garrett, and Matthew Stafford at full health. The 49ers already have seen the Rams twice in the regular season. So if you see them for a third time in the postseason, you could find a weakness in that defense that Kyle Shanahan can exploit. He's too good of a coach to not be able to find some kind of crack in the Rams' armor of invincibility that they have right now in the offseason to not be able to take advantage of it. And we always see teams that shock us every once in a while that when the Super Bowl went, everybody thought that the Super Bowl winner was over. Prime example, the 2015 Denver Broncos. As soon as Peyton Manning couldn't throw the football further than 20 yards downfield, you wrote the Denver Broncos off. But they still were able to win the Super Bowl because of their defense. And the best teams don't always win the Super Bowl. And I feel the 49ers right now, look, even though you're not as talented as what the Rams are, the gap in talent isn't big enough to where you don't have a shot at being able to beat them in the playoffs, in the NFC Championship, possibly with a trip to the Super Bowl on the line. The last team that the Rams want to see in the NFC Championship is a team that they already played 2 times. Because once you see them a third time, in spite of how good they are, you know a way to find a way to attack some kind of weakness in spite of how stacked they may be. And if Brock Purdy can do a better job taking care of the football, which Mike Evans should help, since Brock Purdy likes to take a lot of risk throwing it to one of the best contested catch wide receivers in NFL history. You just throw the shit up and Mike Evans comes down with it. And for Kyle Shanahan, this is a legacy year. Think about how different Kyle Shanahan's legacy could be if he finds a way to upset the Rams, keep the super team from living up to expectations, and he ends up being the one that ends up hoisting the Lombardi Trophy at the end of the year. It'll be one of the craziest career arcs that we've seen from an NFL head coach. He'll go from being viewed as an elite offensive mind that chokes in the big games to now being a guy that won it when people least expected him to be able to do so. So this is the state of the franchise for the San Francisco 49ers. This team has a shot to beat the Rams, even if they don't have a lot of misfortune that goes in their favor against the LA Rams. I think that if they see the Rams in the playoffs, if they're fully healthy at that point, they can beat the Rams. I don't think the talent gap is that big that the 49ers have no shot at winning the Super Bowl at all this year, if that's the matchup that they have to go through in order to get back there. Last thing I want to talk about before we get up on out of here, I want to give my first year expectations for Mike McCarthy as the Steelers' new head coach. For the first time in 19 years, you will not see Mike Tomlin patrolling the sidelines of the Steelers this year. And Mike McCarthy was probably the most boring hire of this offseason because perception-wise, it doesn't feel like the Steelers took a huge swing from Mike Tomlin. It essentially looks like you got Mike Tomlin and white covered paint, and he just knows offense a lot better than what Mike Tomlin did. But even though you can claim Mike McCarthy is the white version of Mike Tomlin, or he's the offensive version of Mike Tomlin, he raises the ceiling a lot higher than what the ceiling has been with the Steelers under Mike Tomlin for the past decade. The Steelers can actually win a playoff game with Mike McCarthy since you're going to have a better coaching staff. You expect for your defensive coordinator to get more out of the defense than what Terrell Austin did. And the Pittsburgh Steelers hired a pretty respectable defensive coordinator. Now, he's not an elite defensive mind, but Patrick Graham is an experienced defensive play caller. He's been around for a few years now. He's coached some solid defenses, so you at least should see the defense go from being average to slightly above average, maybe with the probability of, if everything goes right and they don't have any major injuries, they could be a top 10 defense. But the offense still has somewhat of a cap on it. The offense is good enough with what you added at receiver, Michael Pittman, Jerry Bernard, signing Rico Dowdle to have a good 1-2 punch at running back. You are good enough to win a playoff game, depending on the matchup. And if the Steelers win a playoff game, Mike McCarthy, he's going to be viewed as a hero. Because I think Mike McCarthy is in the best situation possible that any of these new head coaches could be in as far as what the expectations are. If the Steelers miss the playoffs, Steelers fans aren't going to be calling for Mike McCarthy to get fired. If anything, the perception of Mike McCarthy isn't really going to change, since Steelers fans for the longest have been wanting the team to miss the playoffs so they can have a high draft position and have the opportunity of being able to pick from some of the best quarterbacks available. And with next year's quarterback class being pretty deep, one of the more deeper quarterback classes that we've had in the last few years, if the Steelers go 8-9 and miss the playoffs, Steelers fans are okay with that. Sure, you would love to have the opportunity to have a shot at possibly surprising everybody and making a Cinderella run to the Super Bowl, but we know the Steelers aren't good enough to win the Super Bowl this year. So if you miss out on the playoffs, if you're a Steelers fan, you don't really feel that upset about it. Because you're like, at least we finally are in position to be picking high in the draft, and we can walk away with one of the premier quarterbacks in the draft coming up next. And with Mike McCarthy, what he knows on the offensive side of the ball, if you trust his judgment, his eyes when it comes to getting it right at quarterback, then you trusted Mike Tomlin, who seemed to be Helen Keller when it came to getting the offense right and finding a franchise quarterback. Now, the other good thing about Mike McCarthy is, let's say that you make it to the playoffs and you win a playoff game. Then the perception is that, okay, you are an upgrade from Mike Tomlin because you were able to do what he couldn't in over a decade, deliver the Steelers a playoff win. That is all Steelers fans really want this year. If the Steelers win a playoff game, mission accomplished. Now, if the Steelers get to the playoffs and they lose in the first round like how they have done over the last decade, then the perception about Mike McCarthy becomes a little bit more toxic, because now it's like, okay, we got Mike Tomlin with a different coat of paint who knows offense, but we still can't go further than being a one-and-done playoff team. So what really was the point of letting Mike Tomlin step down if we just were going to have a new coach, new coat of paint, and still have the same outcome? At that point, it becomes an organization problem. And then you start having questions about, was it really Mike Tomlin? Was Mike Tomlin really the reason for the Steelers' shortcomings in the postseason? Or was he overcompensating for some of the incompetence that we didn't really realize was going on in the Steelers front office? Because Mike Tomlin has been the face of the franchise for nearly 2 decades. And when things weren't going right and the Steelers underachieved, we put all the blame on Mike Tomlin. But now with him being gone, you can't just point the finger and put it all on Mike McCarthy. Now you got to say, okay, maybe Ramon Khan has something to do with this. Maybe the Rooneys and the ownership has something to do with this. Because it's not just a Mike Tomlin problem. It also has hindered Mike McCarthy. So for Mike McCarthy, the expectations are weirdly even killed. Steelers fans aren't expecting to be Super Bowl contenders this year. They either want one or two things. They either want you to win a playoff game, or they want you to miss the playoffs so you can be in position to drive a legit quarterback that can be the franchise signal caller for the next decade. And the worst outcome is it's the same movie, same outcome with a different head coach. So my first year expectations is I expect for the Steelers to be competitive till the final week of the regular season, either get into the playoffs or barely miss the playoffs, being in the outside looking in. And if they get to the playoffs, I expect them to at least win one playoff game, depending on the matchup. If you're telling me the Steelers play, let's say, the Broncos, I don't think they got a shot at winning that game in the first round. But if you're telling me that they got to play the Jaguars, I like their chances. If they got to play the Kansas City Chiefs, I kind of like their chances. But if the Chiefs end up being what they used to be a year before last, then the Steelers have no shot. But there's a few matchups the Steelers have a chance at being able to win. Like if they got to play the Chargers, that's a pretty evenly matched game. It just really comes down to the matchup that determines how high the probability is of seeing the Steelers finally win a first-round playoff game. But I expect for Mike McCarthy to have anywhere between 9 to 10 wins this season, have the Steelers at least be competitive in their first-round playoff game, and maybe win it, which I believe this is the best chance the Steelers have at winning a playoff game with just how solid the roster is. You don't really have a lot of overwhelming weaknesses, but you don't have a lot of overwhelming strengths that really separate you from everybody else. So I think that the Steelers are a solid team, and they'll have a solid first season under Mike McCarthy because everything's even kill. If you miss the playoffs, good. We got a high draft pick. If we make it to the playoffs and win the playoff game, great. You're an upgrade over Mike Tomlin. These are my first year expectations for Mike McCarthy. And this is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. Before you get up on out of here, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon if you live, eat, breathe, sleep and die football. We're talking everything football, NFL, college football, 24/7, 365 days throughout the year. If you're a football junkie, make sure that you are subscribed, have post notifications turned on so you can get your daily football fix in. Please, I'm begging you guys, if you have any questions, any topics that you would like me to discuss on a future episode, add us on Instagram, X, or send them in the DMs, and I promise you we will get to them in a future episode. Also follow us on those platforms because we post bonus content and we keep you up to date with everything that's going on with the pod. Check us out alongside following us on social media. You can follow the podcast, subscribe to the podcast on all podcasting platforms, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. Give us a 5-star review. If you enjoyed this episode, you want to support the grind, and you enjoy the content, giving us a 5-star review is a free way to support us. Takes less than 10 seconds to do. Once again, if you're listening on YouTube, the links to the pod are down in the description down below. And lastly, we want to hear from you. Join the JT Sports Discord. We're trying to talk ball with you. The link is in the description below. I appreciate you guys.